Hello again. I am Jamie Buckland with West Virginia Few Families United for Education, and you guys have already seen me earlier today. We had a great conversation about VEDA microgrants. I am now back to talk about House Bill 3408. So if you are in West Virginia, if you've been following along on this a couple of weeks ago, the bill was introduced. There was a lot of talk about the bill. There were a lot of concerns about the bill. What there wasn't was a lot of information about the intention of the bill, and it kind of left it open for interpretation and just quite frankly some chaos, if you will. In its introduced version, there was a sincere mistake, is my understanding, which kind of trampled upon the traditional homeschoolers, of which I am one, a 16-year veteran homeschooling mother who has benefited greatly from the work of homeschool giants in the state of West Virginia and beyond. Nationally, HSLDA, here in the state of West Virginia, CHUV and WVHEA. We know their advocates to be the pilgrims, the ones who are fighting to expand and protect homeschool freedoms. And there were some concerns with, what I believe to be was a sincere mistake. But then what took place after that was some conversations between those stakeholders, from the treasurer's office in trying to administer the program. There needed to be some things addressed from traditional homeschoolers, some concerns about placing the IIP homeschoolers over into the exemption C, the traditional exemption, and the ramifications of that. And things just kind of were at a standstill. And the bill was moved off of the special calendar to the regular calendar, which meant that if it didn't get picked back up, then it would be left to die. And that's where it was. I wasn't included in a lot of those conversations. I was kind of taking a back seat on it, mindful of my role with the few in just kind of trying to be a conduit for information, if you will. But I was talking with some of those who were involved in those conversations. And as I began to hear more about what the stakeholders really wanted the bill to do, I had an idea, and I worked on that idea a little bit. And then I reached out to Chairman Ellington, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the last couple of years. And he said, look, if you think you can do something with it, give it a go. His counsel was fantastic, Melissa White, and worked with her, met with her, talked to her about ways we could amend 3408 and bring it back to life. And after Monday meeting with her and getting some of the other delegates informed on what was going on, your homeschool hero, Kathy Krause, who does so much for homeschoolers in West Virginia, talking with her and figuring out how we could bring it back on and get the support. Adam Burkhammer. There were just a number of players who kind of caught wind of this and decided to help figure out how we could make it work. Again, the homeschool organizations contributing to that, clarifying and making sure that homeschoolers were protected. We were able to get some language that kind of checked a number of boxes. So I'm going to run through it. I'm going to try to keep this as informative as possible and just run through it in a way that parents and that would be impacted, whether a traditional homeschooler or a Hope Scholar parent. Hopefully this will be informative for you and for other stakeholders. Keep in mind, I am not an attorney. This is not an interpretation of anything. I'm just simply relaying, and I'm going to refer to actual line numbers and page numbers, which what I think is the most up-to-date current copy. It may not be after the title got amended. So I'll refer to page and line numbers and cite that, and then you'll be able to go in on the updated version if that's not correct by the time you're watching this. So we'll get started in the beginning here on page 1 from lines 6, 7, 8, around there. We start out by clarifying that in this amendment to 3408, it says a child who is exempt from compulsory school attendance under this section is not subject to the requirements of 1831-1. 1831 is where the HOPE language is, okay? And HOPE in its origin was intended to be a funding mechanism. If you think about the Promise Scholarship or West Virginia Invest, it was intended to be a funding mechanism. The way it was written was as an exemption. And I'm going to pull up a handy dandy chart here in a minute. We'll go over it. But the way it was written was as an exemption, which then made it a little bit tricky because exemptions are how you are exempt from compulsory attendance, but no one is graduating from the HOPE Scholarship Program. No one is being educated by the HOPE Scholarship Program. And so it was making it a little tricky in the for the treasurer's office and the administration of this, because it wasn't really its own exemption. And so HOPE scholars could enroll in a B or K school, and then they would be regulated by those regulations. They had access to what that school had access. It got tricky for those of us who were not enrolling in anything full-time, who were under the individualized instructional program. It got a little tricky. And traditional homeschoolers, rightfully so, did not want us attached to their exemption. And so we had to get creative in how we would remove the HOPE exemption from being in and of itself an exemption, and in its place have what is now the assembled instructional module. Talk a little bit more about that here in a moment. But it was to kind of fix the exemption issue, that HOPE was not an exemption. There was also an equal protection issue, meaning that, and you parents were already seeing this, right? You had traditional homeschoolers who had sports access under the bill that we passed in 2020. But HOPE scholars didn't have that access. There was diploma protection. And these were issues. Senator Rucker, who's been our champion of the HOPE scholarship since its inception, she was aware of these issues. And so there was work to try to fix these issues. But it looks like this bill has the potential, we'll see how the Senate responds to it, but it looks like it has the potential to address those issues. But what it says right here in the very beginning is that the extra requirements and the contractual agreement that is all spelled out down in the HOPE section of the code in 1831 is not applicable, especially to exemption C, but to the other exemptions in this code. So that's the first thing to note. If we go on down to page 4, we will see that for traditional homeschoolers, should this make its way out of the Senate, they'll no longer be obligated to submit their assessments in 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. I remember when we were assessing and submitting every single year, and then thanks to John Kerry, Mike Donnelly, the work of, again, those homeschool greats, those submissions were reduced down to 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th. And should this be passed, then we'll remove those 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 11th submissions. Still be required to assess. Traditional homeschoolers would still be required to assess. I did have a question about, well, what about this year? Would you have to submit that this year if you had a 3rd, 5th, 8th, or 11th? Today, the House bill has made its way out of the House in an overwhelming positive vote. It made its way out, and it also was voted to be effective on passage. So should the Senate get behind this and the governor, quickly get it signed, then it would go into effect there once it's signed into law. And then that's it. And we would not, traditional homeschoolers, I have a 5th grader. My LCK is a 5th grade traditional homeschooler. I will not be required to submit her assessment. Still required to carry it out to assess her, but wouldn't be required to submit it. So that is, again, on page, how did I already lose my place? On page 4, section E under exemption C. All right, another thing that was added in there under exemption C is a child receiving home instruction. This is page 5, around lines 5, 6. A child receiving home instruction pursuant to this section may also be referred to throughout this code as a homeschool student or similar reference. The reality is that often in code, they just referred back to homeschool students, and that needed to be clarified. It needed to be better defined. All right, we're getting to the meat of this and we'll wrap it up. If we go on down to page 7, we'll see a strikeout of what was exemption M, what was the Hope Scholarship exemption. That is now the assembled instructional module. Named it that so that it could be branded as an AIM student. Traditional homeschool students are known as homeschoolers. Those using the Hope Scholarship and using this criteria as the way to educate their child, the AIM assembled instructional module, will be branded as an AIM student, and that will help county board personnel, that will help parents to understand the distinction. You know, they're going to be required to assess every year, submit every year by June 8th. The language under exemption M is reflective of what is required in the Hope administrative law, and that will be submitted by June 8th. And here's how we defined the assembled instructional module. It means a program of study organized and facilitated by either the child's parent or legal guardian or educational service provider or providers chosen by the child's parent or legal guardian. And participation may take place in the child's home or in a location chosen by the parent or legal guardian. The rest of that language is going to look extremely familiar because it's just carried over from traditional homeschool language, which was carried over to micro schools and learning pods. You're going to notice a theme here, and I want to make it very clear. Traditional homeschoolers are the OGs of school choice. They are the ones who have paved the way in expanding unconventional methods that allow families to have the true decision-making power. And so it is from their work that us Hope Scholars are benefiting from. And so that's where it clarifies for exemption M. No longer the Hope Scholarship exemption, now the AIM exemption, the Hope at Home, if you will. Those who were saying, well, I'm homeschooling with Hope Scholarship. We want to be very protective just for clarity's sake, to make it easier, to remove ambiguity, to remove complexity. We want to make it clear that traditional homeschoolers are under exemption C, they're private pay, and those of us using the Hope Scholarship not enrolled in school, we were the individualized instructional program, which was getting confused with IEPs, and so it would now be AIM, assembled instructional module. So that takes care of that. At the end of that on page 10, lines roughly 15 to 20, section 8, notwithstanding any provision of this code to the contrary, assembled instructional module students shall have all of the educational rights and privileges this code makes available to homeschool students who receive instruction pursuant to subsection C of this section and may participate in any state or county program available to homeschool students. This was the safe way to solve the equal protection issues: sports, promise scholarship, diploma protection. There's a long list. We'll get that to you at another time. But basically, this was the safe way to say, hey, you can benefit from what these traditional homeschoolers have done, but we're not going to necessarily attach you to their exemption, which would muddy the waters. All right. We're going to keep going. That was also added to micro schools and learning pods. So that also provides a pathway for eligibility for SSAC and those other equal protection. One other thing that was done was to clarify on page 17 that we get down into the Hope language of this. How can you use Hope as a funding mechanism? There are 4 exemptions that you can use when you are a Hope Scholarship eligible recipient, I think is the right reflection of that language. And it says that you could use it for B, which is a private school that has an agreement with the county. My understanding is like all of the Catholic schools in West Virginia are exemption B schools. They have an agreement with their county. Exemption K schools are registered with the state. You could use it with them. And then exemption M is in Mary, the new assembled instructional module. The former IIP, the Hope at Home, you can use that for Hope Scholarship. And N is in Nancy, the micro school learning pod. What you can't use it for is exemption C, homeschoolers. So we were able to further distinguish between traditional homeschoolers and Hope Scholars who are using the IIP, now the AIM. And then towards the end there was just one other place, and I'm going to draw attention to it on page 29, where it referred to individualized instructional program, and that's been swapped out for assembled instructional module. I'm going to go ahead and just refer to this. You're not going to be able to see it very clear from what we're doing here, but I just want you to know we've adapted our chart to show that if this passes out of the Senate and goes into effect, this is essentially what it will do. And if you've been following our work here over the last 16 months, then you've become familiar with our K-12 educational profile chart that we've been using that shows how you satisfy compulsory attendance or how you're exempt from it. We went ahead and moved C all the way over to the right. It used to sit there in the middle. We moved it over so that exemption B, K, M, and N could be situated to show that with those 4 exemptions, you could use them with private pay. And private pay is the only option for exemption C, or you could also use for B, K, M, and N, the Hope Scholarship public funding. It is now applicable for those 4 methods. And we went through and kind of showed the other ways that you've been looking for information, and then seat time, 180 days. Can I submit a portfolio review? Must I submit to a standardized test? So we'll drop this photo in the comments everywhere this is being streamed so that you'll be able to refer to that quick and easy. If you have questions about 3408, reach out to your lawmaker. You're more than welcome to reach out to us. Again, this has passed out of the House, and we want to make sure that you are informed and have access to accurate, clear information so that you can make informed decisions. If this is something that you feel good about, if you like the information that you just heard, you feel good about it, and you want to reach out to your senator, we are in that stage now. And so if you want to reach out to your senator and have a conversation with them, in order for this to go into effect, we would need it to pass out of the Senate and the governor sign it for it to become law and become effective on passage. So that's what we've got for 3408. I'm sure you're going to have questions. I'm going to be available this evening to answer those. Happy to answer those publicly on Facebook. If you are, today was also the launch of the Hope Scholarship application season. So if you've got questions about Hope Scholarship, you're welcome to reach out to us here at the West Virginia View. And hopefully that made a little bit more sense of the googly gook. And you guys have a great evening.